You are not the Father. Ways. So we're just going to decimate everyone. I think those cultural anthropologists are the ones who smoke the most weed.
That's not how you do it.
It's right for them. It's their form of population control.
Hello and welcome to the Church of Awesome.
The church to end all churches.
We'd like to thank you for joining our services this week. Presiding is Bill. I will be conducting. I am Demi-Pope Chris. And joining us in place of our normal guests are Jeremy, the Word.
Word.
And we have the Venerable Jacob.
Peep.
So today we're going to be talking about missionary work through the years and throughout the earth.
Anthropology has a lot of different views on these sort of things. And while I don't take the cultural anthropologist view that a lot of cultural anthropologists do, that every culture is nice and there are good things and
they're all
equally valid.
They all have good things about them. And we should just think that they're all good.
No, I think there are definitely quantifiable
I think those
ways.
cultural anthropologists are the ones who smoke the most weed.
There definitely are quantifiable ways to say one culture is above another in certain aspects, but
They do practice human sacrifice, but who's to say that that's really wrong?
Who's to say that human sacrifice is wrong per se? It's right for their culture.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
we're just being...
It's right for them. It's their form of population control.
yeah, but the first is from a cultural perspective, which is a significant amount of what missionary work is, bringing one culture and basically trying to force it onto another a lot of the time. And
So you would say it's not just them bringing the religious culture, it's them bringing their own,
that is a significant part of what missionary work has been through the ages. I was actually quite surprised recently when one of my friends had linked a piece about missionary work, some tips by someone in his church about missionary work, and I decided to take a look at it, and they actually had a lot more progressive ideas than have definitely been purported throughout the ages, but even in recent history. They were saying, don't try to bring your culture, just bring the Lord's word.
Mm-hmm.
Don't romanticize about their culture when you get back.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of stuff that was just actually really good considering how much damage.
Well, see, they learn
they've
from their
done,
mistakes
so-
over the years, because every single one of those they've done wrong.
Yes.
The problem with that, though, is religion is very culturalistic.
Oh, yes,
A-
entirely.
A huge portion of what you do in a religion is based on the culture. I speaking from an ex-mormon sort of standpoint, in Southeast Asia, trying to get people to fast once a month. Go a day without eating when they hardly have enough to eat as it is. Asking them to pay a tenth of their gross income when they don't make enough money to keep their families alive.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to do, but you're supposed to do it as, it's part of the Lord's word, but really that's a cultural thing. If you don't have the means, if you don't have that expendable income, why the hell are you going to ask somebody to pay it? And so religion is very cultural. I think it's pretty much impossible to try and just bring the Lord's word and not try to force the culture of it on them.
That was one of the major problems I had with it, but I was impressed at
that they would even try.
that they are trying, because they're not just bulldozing their culture, and they're strategically
building a church on top of it.
They're planting it here and there and it'll
letting
grow
it.
eventually, and the trees will overtake the temples and break down all the sacred buildings with big roots and trees and things.
But
and things of that nature and metaphor.
to be fair,
metaphor.
though,
It's not a perfect metaphor.
that's basically what all cultures do anytime there's interaction. So at least they're being a little more subtle about it than they definitely have been throughout history with fantastic things like the Crusades
Well, right. Here's a sword.
or genocide against the American Indians.
Yeah, Manifest Destiny is one of the biggest pieces of bullshit in American history.
Oh yeah, that was just absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
God has given us the manifest. He's told us that we have the higher ways. So we're just going to decimate everyone as we expand westward.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and we're going to move you to this crap land we don't want.
Mm-hmm. And then we're going to move you from that crap land to even crappier land.
Because we now want
we just
this
found
crap.
some.
We found land that's worse than the shit you have right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to take the shit you have right now and make it less shit and give you the extreme shit. That's you.
Yeah, one of the major things is basically just overriding culture. When you go in, you're bringing a lot of your preconceived notions. Nobody can escape some degree of ethnocentrism. Being aware of it is the first step, which most people aren't even aware that they're being entirely ethnocentric.
Yeah, you get
And
that
for those of
culture
us
shock thing.
for those of the listeners who don't know what ethnocentrism is, think of racism, and that's actually what it is. Because there's no such thing as racism. Because humanity is a race.
Yeah.
So if you're racist, you hate humans.
Yeah.
If you're racist, then you're hating people who are no longer alive, because I don't know of any Homo floresiensis or Neanderthalis or anyone else, any other race who's...
We have that culture shock thing about you go to a culture and you say, well, they do that wrong.
Yeah,
That's not how you do it.
That's entirely what people do. And, you know, when you're a missionary, a lot of the times, I wouldn't know from experience, but throughout history, generally, they've gone, well, that's wrong. We got to change it.
Mm-hmm.
And
They pray to their ancestors? That's wrong.
Yeah. Well, or even things that, they live in a different environment, and so the environment behaves differently. So they go, well, you're growing the wrong crops. That's the problem.
You gotta grow more corn.
Yeah.
Corn is a stable crop. It'll help you survive for the rest of your life.
and you have to grow it in these fields like this, and plant it and reap it like
Corn
this.
doesn't grow in this environment. I don't know who the fuck you think you are.
Yeah. It's just that kind of stuff where they say like, oh no, this is the way things are supposed to be done. Just completely discounting the fact that
That it's
this
a completely
entirely
different culture. It's a completely different landscape.
in different
that-
environment.
Things don't work the same in every single part of the
Yeah.
world.
Well, one of the ways culture evolves is from the environment and the requirements for the environment. How the people are living there and how that environment affects what they do is actually quite significant. You can find a reason why people would do these things in each culture from most of the time from the environment. Like one of the reasons you find polyandry, or one woman with multiple husbands, in Mongolia, some parts were that they wanted to keep the family land amongst the family. So they just had all the brothers marry the same woman so that they can hold on to the land because it's, so important there.
Mm-hmm.
And, that sort of explanation can describe a lot of why people do what they do anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're coming in...
Here's a question. If you got polyandry and, say, 6 brothers are all married to the same woman, how does that brother ever know whether or not the child is actually his?
I think that's part of the point.
Because I don't think Maury Povich existed or exists in Mongolia.
Yeah.
I don't think they have a "you are not the father." Pretty sure they don't have that over there.
They've been doing blood tests there for generations.
Oh yeah, they had genetics way before we did. Haven't even.
I think it's part
Apparently,
of the point.
I haven't been reading the right history books.
I think it's part of the point that you have these large families that all of the children of this are the responsibility of everyone.
Yeah,
they're
that's
of the family.
why.
I guess that makes
Exactly.
sense.
That's generally how it works. Actually, in most cultures, whether they know the father or not, the kid is part of the entire group, not a single nuclear family like we have. Yeah, that is one of the major problems that you'll get with missionaries in very remote areas throughout history. You've got the Spanish coming in and kicking the ass of the Indian in South America and North America, and they just come in and basically destroy their culture and make them live in their houses and speak their language, which is another part where language is another significant factor, but I'll get into that later.
Would you say in that example that it was more of religion being used as a facade for their just conquest? That we're going to preach to these people, which was just hey, we're going to use this as a thin veneer of hey, we're doing the right thing, just so that
We're
they can
taking
go
your
and-
land because we want more, but God told us to, so it's okay.
Yeah,
Definitely, but
it's well, they wouldn't convert. So
well, you don't necessarily have to completely redefine their culture to conquer them. Just look at the Romans, leaving things basically how it was, just sticking a little bit of their culture in there. But
and saying, just pay us every once in a while and just keep on. Keeping on.
That still happens today for a lot of South American tribes in very remote areas, like in the jungles. You'll get groups where you'll have people wearing their loincloths or whatever, and living with their traditional tools, their traditional everything, and then the missionaries come in and say, no, you should wear these clothes. And, you should live in these houses, and we'll give you these things. And generally, they also upset the sort of balance of power among the tribes by giving them things like shotguns.
Yeah.
Definitely a little more effective than a bow and arrow, but they definitely come in and do a lot of damage. And
from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah. So even if they're not being violent like traditionally they have been, they're still,
they're just upsetting the balance of everything.
They're doing almost as much damage, just without the bloodshed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know in Mormonism, at least, the missionaries are obviously there to convert. That's, the biggest push is how many people can you baptize? How many people can you bring into the fold, so to speak? But there's also a requirement that every week you do some sort of community service, whether it's if you're in the States, whether it's going to a cannery or working in a soup kitchen or things like that. In Southeast Asia, where I went, a lot of it was just somebody needs help repairing their house, so we'd go do that on a Monday and help them out. There was one time where we went out and helped harvest the rice crop, which was a ton of fun, knee deep in mud, kicking rice all over the place. It was a hell of a lot of fun. But that that's kind of preserving the culture a little bit, because it's not like, hey, stop growing rice, dumbass. Rice isn't good. It's bread is what you need.
Yeah, you should eat Twinkies.
But at the same time, the religion is a huge part of the culture. So when you're taking away the religion, you're eliminating that culture from the people.
Yeah.
And granted, that's going to happen over time through other means anyway. But
when you upset it so quickly,
religion definitely goes for the throat most of the time. Whether that ends up being a good or a bad thing over time remains to be seen, because sometimes they do bring a lot of advances to a society and fundamentally change it, but they are kind of dicking with the culture way too much, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, they're not obeying the prime directive.
Yeah, and that goes along with the, I'm right, you're wrong, or I'm better because I have all this technology and I have all these, these more efficient ways of doing things. Whereas, yeah, okay, that's great, but this is a people who have their culture.
Yeah, you don't have the experience of using that in a different context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't know that it'll work for them. What they've got works for them just fine. So when you try and bring something new, sometimes it works. Yeah, sometimes it helps them out a little bit, but I think more often than not, it's a hindrance rather than help.
It's like, you know what you need? iPods. That's what you guys need.
Another aspect that you could approach missionary work from historically more so than in modern times is linguistically. Language holds a lot of power and culture more than most people realize. The Worf-Sapir hypothesis that a lot of linguists will instantly know, well, actually all linguists should probably know, basically states that your language has a subconscious influence on how you perceive the world. And you think about that in the way that we in English use terms to describe money. We say the literal time is money. We say you can invest time, spend time. I don't have enough time. If you think about it, we talk about time as though it is a currency, even though it isn't necessarily. So it definitely shapes our perception that time is a finite resource that we should spend wisely. Anyone coming into a new land, missionaries or otherwise, would generally try to make them speak their language rather than trying to learn their language. And that is a fundamental shift in thought at that point of how to perceive the world.
And you think of idioms too,
Yeah,
hardly
precisely.
any idiom will ever translate into another language. I mean, you can translate the idiom word for word, but it's not going to make any sense to somebody in the new language because it has a context that only somebody in that native language will understand. And that's, the perception of the world or the perception of those particular words meaning a particular thing just doesn't translate. And every language, every culture has their own different idioms that you can, sometimes they have rough parallels between two languages, but more often than not, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, that's precisely why, coming in and saying, okay, you're going to talk like us. You got to, read the scriptures in Latin and speak whatever we speak. And
stop talking your nonsense.
Which pisses me off about the English-speaking
like
world in general, because we just kind of expect everyone else to speak English. Now, granted, English is a very global language now, but I think if people from, say, Germany are going to come to America and tour around and see all the sites that America has to see, they're going to learn a little bit of English because nobody in America fucking speaks German. So they're not going to be able to do anything unless they know enough English to get by. Whereas
we
Americans
expect to be able to go over to Germany.
And, hey, I want a taxi. Where is the taxi? And they're like, I don't know what the fuck you're speaking slowly and loudly is not going to make me understand you anymore because you're speaking
if I speak with a German
foreign
accent?
language.
Da ist the taxi.
Das weiß ich nicht. But yeah, language definitely has a significant cultural value in it. And that's one of the reasons that, if you notice, a lot of the people in the U.S. who are so, everything should be taught in English, everything English, 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 most of them are generally pretty conservative, and as we know, conservatives are often religious. One of the best ways to sort of expand your mind in terms of being able to think about things differently is learn another language, because it forces you to think in an entirely different context. One of the things, learning Japanese, just because I learned German first, and there are a lot of similarities in English and German. A lot of the idioms can translate directly, but you do have some things that are different, but it was still pretty much culturally very similar. But learning Japanese, that was just a significant difference in the way of talking about things, just their level of sort of avoiding direct answers when it would be negative. If someone says, hey, you want to go to the movies, then sometimes you'd say, yeah, that'd be great, but, and that's basically how you talk. You just sort of trail off. You just, or...
Yeah, the thing about that is...
that's exactly what they do if you transliterate it.
Well, I think I remember hearing somewhere... at least in terms of Japanese advertising, they don't go the route that America does. Because America's like, this is the best product.
Buy this, it's
Our
great.
product is better than every other product out there. We have the best eye drops. We have the best pillows. We have the best... Whatever we're selling is better than our competition. And we have clinically proven evidence to that
in our own lab in the garage,
right? And we use all these
we
use all these things and all these these misleading words to create this illusion of grandeur and say we have the best thing. Whereas I don't know how much truth there is in this, but I think I heard that Japanese advertising is very much different, where it's it's good enough for what you need. This soap, it cleans your body.
It will do you right.
It gets the job done. That's all we can tell you about it. So please buy it. And if you don't, well...
Then you've dishonored me.
Then
then we will commit suicide. One of the fun things about American advertising is listen for words that are synonyms for not.
Virtually.
Like virtually. Practically. Nearly.
Virtually spotless means there are spots.
Means almost, but not quite.
Yeah.
Language brought a lot of baggage and a lot of trains of thought. I mean, basic things that you take for granted are completely different in other languages. In English, in a lot of the Indo-European languages, like English, stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in some languages, stories are four parts. You have a beginning. Well, you have basically four parts that are not necessarily in chronological order. That's another thing is chronology
Yeah, people
in
view
languages.
time.
And that's something I picked up in one of the classes I took recently, which is all about the title of the class was Ethnic American Literatures. So we're talking people,
From different backgrounds.
from people from different ethnic backgrounds living in America, writing literature in English, but incorporating pieces of their own culture. And a couple of the novels that we read were very, Western novel structure.
Yeah.
You have the beginning, the middle, and the end, and everything's chronological, and it all makes sense. But a couple of them were very fragmented and not necessarily divided up into chapters, but just different sections, and you don't really know when a section ends except for there's just a big space on the page. And, something could happen at the beginning of the book that doesn't make sense until you get 3/4 of the way through it, and then it references back to what happened at the beginning, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, the chronology of storytelling in different cultures it's not the same as English, because like you said, English storytelling is very beginning, middle, end, start to finish.
Well, English time is another thing that we talk about
as a very
metaphorically.
linear thing.
We talk about looking in time going in a line in one direction. You look back behind you.
Yeah, looking back in time.
Back in time.
Back in my day.
Looking forward in time. We view time as a literal sort of direction.
Whereas a lot of other languages think of it more in a round.
Yeah, a lot of them think of it as circular, cyclical things,
or just as a very ethereal thing, as in like there's not specifics in future and past. It's always like, oh, I will do that sometime in the future. Like
blob of timey-wimey.
Exactly. Wobbly, wibbly, wobbly,
timey-wimey stuff. Yeah, precisely. So, it has a lot more implications than most people realize. And, it definitely can do a lot of damage culturally when you force people to speak another language. You're taking away a lot from them culturally, because not only does language express their culture, language is also a cultural identification. One of the ways...
Right, to say you're Japanese, but you don't speak it.
Yeah,
you have the ethnicity perhaps, but you don't have the culture.
Yeah, before the nation states that we have in the modern world, one of the easiest ways to separate groups, one of the most effective ways to separate groups, is to separate them by language, because generally those are the people who are in one group or tribe, the ones who speak the same language.
Yeah, they tend to stick together. Even in the great melting pot that is North America, that is the United States of America. You get large neighborhoods and big portions of cities that are predominantly one ethnicity. That's not white American. You have Little Saigon
all the littles
in Garden Grove, and you have Little Tokyo and things like that, where it's just like a huge gathering of people of a similar culture and the same language, because it's easier for them to get along and to live their life if they still have people around them that can understand what they think,
their cultural frame of reference,
what they're saying,
their norms in there, so that they can feel comfortable. Because culture shock happens for everyone, and it takes a long time to become enculturated. So, to have other people that you can still sort of hold on to your original culture with definitely is a significant advantage for, remaining stable in a society. So back in the days before, missionaries learned the language of the country they were going to, or, at least had translators or anything, they would just come in and bulldoze their way with the language, not only the cultural aspects of the physical cultural aspects, but the linguistic ones as well. So from that standpoint, you really have a lot of damage that can be done with missionary work. And then the fun thing is that it doesn't even necessarily work anyway. They will maybe even cast off the religion, go to another one, get rid of it entirely. And then what are they left with? You know, they're getting rid of this culture that you've imposed on them, but you've already deleted their previous culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, then they have to sort of rediscover their cultural heritage and sometimes just not really
that's how culture
invent
gets
their own.
lost.
Yeah.
You know, with people forcing their own cultures onto other people, and those people then abandoning their culture because, you know, live like us or die.
Yeah.
Which would you choose? You know, it's one of those things that, okay, I want to continue living, so I will abandon my culture and live like these guys do so that I can continue to live. And then 3 or 4 generations later, that culture is gone because they've completely stopped living it. They've forgotten all about it, and they haven't really told their children about it for fear of death, really.
I mean, the same thing happens with just general globalization and when cultures meet other cultures. I mean, this may be accelerated by missionary work, but it seems like something that already happens anyway.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that I've mentioned is happening. It happens all the time.
Right.
It's unavoidable. Even, you know, if you're not trying to do it, even if you have best intentions, you're not trying to force anything
Just
on
as we
anyone.
perfect travel, you know,
Yeah,
we're able
just-
to travel to
just
other places.
the globalization has come about mostly from, you know, modern traveling, because even just, you know, 100, 200 years ago, the world was so vastly, you know, divided, and we've really overlapped a lot of culture and ideas ever since travel, and now specifically the internet coming in. It's really making a much more globalized world. So it's going to happen regardless. But there are ways to sort of safeguard, protect, and deal with culture a lot more sensitively than definitely has been done in the past, and probably still what is being done now.
Mhm.
I remember I was listening to a couple of the older podcasts, and
Shameless plug.
and the other podcast that you guys were on before making your own.
Mhm.
And a lot of the stuff Michael was talking about in that one was, you know, that you're basically bringing, you know, your ideas to, well, for him, to South Americans. Like, no, you know, shake hands when you greet someone.
Yeah.
And
You're supposed to kiss on the cheek. That's too
You're not
sexual.
supposed to bow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're not
That's
supposed to
stupid.
bow.
It's,
Yeah.
it's shaking hands.
Yeah.
Which is a great way to transmit disease,
Yeah,
as we know.
It's one of the best ways,
Yeah.
you know. Kissing someone is on the cheek is much more sanitary.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's just something that religions generally don't really care about, is the cultural impact that they have.
Mhm. Because they think of themselves as having their own culture. It's like, this is our religious culture.
Well, they also think they're right.
This
too.
is the culture of God. This is
Exactly.
what God
Yes.
has given us.
So it's the original culture.
So it's the right culture. It's
Mhm.
the culture that deserves to be everywhere on the earth, and everyone needs to
Spread
shake
like
hands
the plague.
with me.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know, and a lot of cultures see human contact as a very, I don't necessarily want to say sacred,
Mhm.
but it's reserved for certain things. You know, you don't go around patting people on the back. You don't go around shaking people's hands.
Mhm.
Human contact is seen as a very intimate kind of thing.
Mhm. And there are other cultures that are
Oh, yeah.
completely the
It
opposite, where it's like
depends.
Right, where
they're
you're
very
walking, you know,
physical and-
friends,
yeah. Well,
walking down the
strangers
street,
will
holding
you know,
hands, you know, and that's normal. But the thing is, if you as an American or somebody who comes from a culture of shaking hands
Yeah. Mhm.
goes into a culture where human contact is not a common occurrence,
Mhm.
and you hold out your hand to somebody, you're going to think they're rude for not offering their hand back. They're like, what a bastard.
And they're going to think you're
yeah.
attacking them.
Yeah, it's
they're
like,
gonna
I'm
be
offering my
offended
hand in
too.
friendship, and he's not offering his hand back. That means he's not friendly to me. That
Yeah,
means
I should shoot him. Yeah.
that means he's a dick, and I don't need to care what he says. And the other guys think the same thing. Like, what the hell is this guy doing? Offering me his disease-ridden hand. He's trying to fucking kill me.
Yeah.
What a bastard.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that kind of that
Cultural
that
misunderstanding.
cultural misunderstanding from both sides.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why I think, you know, missionary or not, just in general, everyone should really focus on learning a lot about the culture if they're going to another place. And even if you're not going to another place, learning about other cultures, definitely.
Well, it's still a good idea.
Yeah, probably a good idea because it.
It's like you said, these cultures are disappearing. There's things that we can learn from
you know,
their way
definitely.
of viewing the
Well,
world.
that too, and as we said before, the globalization of everything, being so readily able to travel and transport yourself into another culture, into another
Mhm.
place, it would be a good idea to at least learn about that culture and learn what the cultural norms and the social norms are, so that you don't A, look like an ass,
Mhm.
and B, offend people
Mhm.
when you go, because that's
Plus, you're broadening your own horizons. You're becoming a better person.
exactly.
You're seeing the world from different angles, which is not something that religious people like to do.
No,
Yeah,
which is why they're so one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
But the more that you learn about other people and about their cultures and things like that, you kind of understand maybe where they're coming from, and so you don't necessarily, I don't know, hate them as well.
Yeah.
Hate them is a bad word to say, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's that concept of you don't understand it until you study it, and then when you study it and you see why they do it, you can accept it
or tolerate it.
or tolerate it. Yes.
All right, I think it's about time that we commune with the spirits. My spirits are almost empty here, but what I have been drinking up to this point is a Springbank 15-year-old Campbelltown single malt Scotch whiskey. It is staggeringly good. It is just the...
It's so staggeringly good that you drink enough of it and you stagger on home.
Yeah, exactly. That is how good it is. And since we're recording at my tabernacle today, so I figured I would drink something that I wouldn't want to transport anywhere else. So I just opened up my most expensive thing and started drinking it. Springbank 15 is absolutely delicious. They do everything kind of the old-fashioned way. They, floor malt their own stuff just on a big concrete slab, just like they've done for ages. And, they do everything just the way that it's always been done. No modernization. It's very traditional. So it fits with our theme.
No, you can't make whiskey or Scotch whiskey that way. You have to make it the new way.
Yes. But
You have
the
to
end
age
product
it in metallic casks, much like you do beer. Just put it in a vat.
Yes.
Age it.
And the tradition and all the care that goes into it really shows in the final product. It's absolutely delicious. I would recommend anything that is a Springbank whiskey is fantastic, and the 15-year-old is particularly so. I think it's probably their best expression.
All right, well, I am communing with the Balvenie 14-year Caribbean cask aged single malt Scotch whiskey. Caribbean cask meaning rum casks. It's matured in rum casks, which adds a nice bit of rummy kind of sweetness.
Sugary sweetness.
To the whiskey. It's I'm not too familiar with Scotch whiskey, as I'm just sort of getting into I'm getting my feet wet,
Yes.
so to speak.
As he's getting his tongue wet.
As I'm getting my tongue wet, yes. But there's definitely some sweetness to it that you don't find in other Scotch. There's a little bit of a fruitiness that comes through.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Scotch doesn't generally have that kind of fruit aspect to it. So
sure it does. Plenty of them have that. Yeah, you get kind of some interesting things with that one because Balvenie is usually a traditionally very sherried Speyside whiskey. And when they age it in the rum casks, you get a lot of sweetness that you usually get from maybe a Highland or something like that. And so you get kind of this interesting interplay between those two.
Either way, it's quite delicious.
It is.
I would highly recommend it.
Well, I'm not communing with a spirit per se, as I'm still rebuilding my tolerances from St. Patrick's Day over a year ago, where I tried to kill myself with alcohol. Not really, but I almost did practically. So I'm
if he
communing.
had been trying, he probably drank just about enough.
Yeah, I probably would have drank as
An
much.
outside observer
trying.
would not have been able to tell.
So I'm communing with Black Butte, or as I like to say, Black Butt
Black
Porter. It is a fantastic porter. It is very rich and crisp and flavorful, and I highly recommend it because porters are great.
Because it is yummy.
If I recall correctly, that one's a bit smoky.
Yeah.
More
Yes.
smoky than a lot of porters. Not more smoky than shoot,
Smoke.
What's the one that you and I always describe as the chocolate coffee beer?
Smoke.
London Porter?
London, yeah, Fuller's London,
Yeah.
which is a great porter. I highly recommend that one. But Deschutes definitely has that good smokiness, the good thickness that a good porter will have.
Yeah, a lot of complexity too. There's a lot going on.
It's one of my favorite porters.
Mm-hmm.
It is quite excellent.
So back to the topic at hand.
If you think back, a lot of dickery basically has been done through missionaries.
Is that an official term?
Yeah, that's
That is
what
the official term.
that's the official term we use. Dickery. Just looking historically, the religions are often very successful in their conquests because they bring in a lot of money, and then
and they tend to back it up with some sort of firepower.
and that money buys a lot of weapons and people, and
people weapons.
And one of the best things that you can do for an army is to give them a cause and boost their morale by saying this is God's work, and
an army which carries the ark before it would be invincible.
That is a hell of an incentive, as you're doing it for God. And,
No pun intended.
Well, and you don't mind dying if you're doing it.
If you're doing it for God, well, you died in the service of God, you're definitely going to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You get, probably the highest reward that you
bonus
can get.
points.
72 virgins, yeah.
Yeah, 72 virgins, precisely. Throughout history, I mean, you can think of plenty of examples where religions have gone around and done a lot of damage physically.
Mm-hmm.
The Crusades being one of the
easiest example,
the best examples. Then colonizing America is another fantastic. Colonizing anywhere,
colonizing the world.
Yeah, colonizing the world is fantastic. Cultures and peoples. It definitely makes them more alive and
do you have a flag?
Not dead. There has just been countless slaughters, intentional or otherwise, in the case of America with all the diseases.
Yeah, because that imperial time.
Yeah, because
when they colonized Africa and Southeast Asia and the Americas, that every one of those cultures, had to deal with that issue.
Yeah, and we talking about manifest destiny earlier. Using God is a great excuse to commit atrocities when you're colonizing.
It's in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's
like, there's plenty of
and God
atrocities
said
in the
unto
Bible.
them, go and murder every man, woman, child, and animal in this town, and leave nothing living. And if you take any of their cattle for your own and try and eat them, a pox upon you.
Yeah.
It's God has historically been
a genocidal maniac. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, hey, I don't like the city. They're not worshiping me anymore. Let's kill all of them.
Trying to be like God by committing genocide.
I'm trying to be like Jesus. I'm murdering all my friends.
I don't think kind of a dick is an accurate description. I think probably something a little stronger might be in order.
A huge asshole.
Yeah.
A genocidal
maniac. Yes.
Maniac, as Demi-Pope Chris has pointed out earlier.
So I think if I were to sum up everything that's been said,
let me explain. No, there's too much. Let me sum up.
It seems like culture and religion are very closely linked. You've got
religion is part of culture.
Exactly. And so you've got in the beginning, it seems like they were the same thing. And then you start to get religions that want to dominate other cultures while allowing them to still survive, becoming these overarching religions. Or that they've just expanded to the point where you can't stop the culture from being different.
Yeah.
And then globalization, imperialism, it increases the spread of these things. Missionaries go out and try and spread the religion / culture where it doesn't belong, and it just creates a whole fuck-upness.
Well, honestly,
across the world.
I don't think religion belongs anywhere, but that's besides the point.
Well, I say religion / culture because it's hard. Some of the aspects are hard to differentiate from each other, and I think it's important to study these different cultures and anthropology to get an understanding of what humans are, what humans do, how these cultures operate, how they view the world, and not immediately label it as, oh, it's wrong. They got it all backwards. Because if you can understand different languages, different cultures, even understanding the religions and why they believe what they do, because even though they're not true, they do say something about
Yeah.
They
culture.
say something about how the culture developed and where it
Exactly.
came from.
Yeah,
It
and
gives you a little bit of a history lesson.
yeah, look, I mean, if you just look at all this stuff, it gives you a really good idea of where people come from on issues, their beliefs, whatever, how they think about the world, how they perceive the world, and learning about these sort of things, diversifying your ideas and your thoughts. That's never really a bad thing.
Never
learning.
a bad idea, and
Exactly.
it enables your communication
Yeah.
to other people.
Mhm.
If you understand where somebody's coming from, then you can better communicate with them as to your ideas against their ideas, or in harmony with their ideas,
Exactly.
or things like that.
And now it's time for our fatwas of the week. But there's only one fatwa this week because of my stupid fucking computer. It ate all my fatwas. So I'm declaring a partial fatwa on that, and the rest of the fatwa is on you. No, not you listening, but the guy that's listening to this right now who hasn't checked out our website at churchofawesome.com, who hasn't followed us on Twitter at COA Podcast, and who hasn't told any of their friends about us. We know you want to keep your friends, but they're not worth it. You got to share us with them. And then when they hate you for it, that's just too bad. It's their loss, really. So go and check us out on churchofawesome.com. Leave comments, read stories. I put stuff together for you. I did it for you! And follow us on Twitter because I say a lot of witty things that you should all hear. And then you won't have diarrhea for a year. Thank you. This has been Demi Pope Chris. We'd like to thank you for joining us this week on the Church of Awesome. We have been awesome, and you have been awesome. We'd like to leave you with the gift of tongues. Has anyone really been far even as decided to use, even go want to do look more like?
I'm trying to be like Jesus. I'm murdering all my friends. Which is a great way to transmit disease.
Exactly. Wibbly wobbly timey wimey.
Do you have a flag?
The comments made by the hosts and other participants are the opinions of the individuals and not those of any corporate entity. All data and information provided in this program is for informational purposes only. The Church of Awesome makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, currentness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. If you like what you've heard in today's sermon, come visit us at churchofawesome.com or follow us on Twitter at COA Podcast.